Are you really willing to lose $20 million over a homeless woman? The question hung in the silent boardroom like smoke nobody wanted to breathe. Ethan Cole stared through the glass walls of the 42nd floor conference room while Manhattan glowed beneath the rain outside. Nobody moved. Nobody touched the expensive coffee sitting untouched beside their tablets and contracts. Victor Hayes leaned back slowly in his chair, adjusting the silver cufflinks on his tailored shirt with the confidence of a man who believed money could solve every problem on earth. "This is insanity," Victor said quietly. "We've spent 8 months negotiating this acquisition." Ethan didn't answer. His jaw tightened while his eyes stayed fixed on the city below. Somewhere down there, hidden beneath billions of dollars in steel and light, was a woman standing in the rain with a little girl wrapped in a pink blanket. 3 days earlier, the black Rolls-Royce slowed beside a crowded intersection near the Lower East Side as rain hammered against the windows. Ethan barely looked up from the contract glowing on his phone screen. $20 million. One signature away from final approval. The redevelopment project would demolish 4 aging apartment buildings and replace them with luxury high-rise towers overlooking the river. Investors loved it. The board loved it. Wall Street already expected the announcement Monday morning. "Traffic's backed up, sir," the driver said. Ethan rubbed his temple, exhausted after 18 straight hours of meetings. "Take another route." "Can't. Construction ahead." Ethan sighed and finally glanced outside. That was when he noticed her. A woman stood near the bus stop holding a little girl against her chest beneath a weak umbrella that barely protected either of them. The child looked no older than 7. Rainwater soaked the woman's sneakers while cold wind pushed strands of blonde hair across her face. She looked exhausted, but not broken. There was a difference. Ethan had spent his life around desperate people. Investors, competitors, reporters. People begging for money usually carried a certain look in their eyes. This woman didn't. The little girl coughed softly, burying her face deeper into the woman's shoulder. Ethan looked away immediately. "Keep moving." But traffic stopped again. The woman stepped carefully between cars, not asking for money, only speaking quietly to drivers through cracked windows. Most ignored her. One man waved her away without even looking at her face. Another rolled up his window before she could finish talking. Then suddenly she stopped beside Ethan's car. For a second, neither of them moved. Ethan expected the usual speech. Spare change. Food. Help. Instead, she looked directly at him through the rain-covered glass and simply said, "Excuse me, sir, do you know if the church shelter on 8th Street still lets children stay overnight?" Ethan blinked once, caught off guard by the question. Before he could answer, the little girl coughed again, harder this time. The woman pulled the blanket tighter around her daughter and apologized softly for bothering him. Ethan reached for his wallet automatically. "Wait," he said as the window lowered halfway. He pulled out several $100 bills without thinking. The woman looked at the money, then back at him. And to Ethan's surprise, she didn't take it. The rain continued pouring across the city while Ethan held the money near the open window, waiting for the woman to take it. Instead, she glanced down at the bills for only a second before gently shaking her head. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice almost lost beneath the sound of traffic and rain. "But my daughter is watching." Ethan frowned slightly, confused by the response. In 20 years of building companies worth billions of dollars, nobody had ever refused his money, especially not someone standing outside in soaked clothes holding a coughing child. "It is not charity," Ethan replied. "Just take it." The little girl looked up from beneath the blanket with tired blue eyes while the woman carefully brushed wet hair away from the child's forehead. "Lily," she whispered gently, "say thank you to the gentleman." "Thank you," the little girl said quietly before coughing again into the blanket. Ethan noticed how pale the child looked. The woman shifted her daughter higher into her arms, clearly exhausted from carrying her. Ethan glanced toward the driver. "Find the nearest pharmacy." But before the driver could answer, the woman spoke again. "Sir, I appreciate it. Really. But if I teach her that survival means waiting for strangers to save us, then I am failing her." Ethan stared at her in silence. Something about the way she said it unsettled him. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. The kind of honesty people usually lost long before ending up on the streets. Traffic finally began moving again. Horns echoed behind the Rolls-Royce as drivers grew impatient. Ethan should have rolled up the window and forgotten the entire moment immediately. That was what he always did. Problems belonged to other people. Feelings slowed decisions. Compassion complicated business. That was the rule Victor Hayes repeated during nearly every negotiation. You cannot save everyone. Ethan had believed that for years. Yet somehow he could not stop looking at the little girl shivering beneath that thin pink blanket. Wait, Ethan said again. The woman paused. What is your name? Sarah. And your daughter? Lily. Ethan nodded slowly, though he did not know why he cared. How long have you been out here? Sarah hesitated for the first time. About 4 months. For months. Ethan looked back at the glowing skyline surrounding them. For months in New York winter could destroy people. What happened? He asked before thinking. Sarah lowered her eyes briefly. Medical debt after my husband passed away. Then rent went up. Then everything else happened all at once. She said it calmly, almost mechanically, like someone who had repeated the story too many times already. Ethan suddenly noticed Lily holding a small paperback book beneath the blanket. The cover was bent from rainwater. You like reading? He asked the little girl. Lily nodded shyly. Mom says books make bad days smaller. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest unexpectedly. He looked away toward the rain-covered windshield. For a moment, he remembered another rainy night long ago. A freezing car parked behind a gas station. His mother wrapping her coat around him because the heater stopped working. Ethan quickly pushed the memory down before it could fully surface. Sir, the driver interrupted quietly. We are going to be late for the meeting. Ethan checked the time. 7 minutes until the biggest deal of the year. Investors were already waiting upstairs downtown. Victor would be furious. Yet before the window closed, Ethan heard himself ask one final question. What is the worst part? Sarah looked directly into his eyes this time. Not angry, not ashamed, just tired. Then she answered with a sentence Ethan would hear in his head for the next 3 days. Watching your child think you're suffering is somehow their fault. The elevator climbed toward the top floor, while Sarah's words refused to leave Ethan's mind. Watching your child think you're suffering is somehow their fault. He stared at his reflection in the mirrored wall beside him, adjusting the sleeve of his dark navy suit while Manhattan lights flickered through the glass tower around him. Normally, before major meetings, his mind became razor-sharp. Numbers, risks, leverage, outcomes. Tonight felt different. Distracted. Human. The elevator doors opened directly into the executive conference level where assistants hurried through marble hallways carrying contracts and financial reports. The moment Ethan stepped inside, conversations immediately shifted. Investors stood from leather chairs. Lawyers straightened stacks of documents. A giant digital rendering of the redevelopment project glowed across the screen at the front of the room. 3 luxury towers overlooking the East River. Rooftop gardens. Private fitness clubs. Penthouse units worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. Victor Hayes walked over immediately with the confident smile Ethan had seen during every successful acquisition. There he is, Victor said while fixing his expensive watch beneath the cuff of his gray suit. Tonight changes everything. Ethan loosened his tie slightly. Does it? Victor laughed softly. $20 million in projected profit during Phase 1 alone. I would say yes. Ethan remained silent while taking his seat at the head of the massive walnut conference table. The room slowly settled as legal teams prepared final documents. One investor from Chicago leaned forward with excitement. Once demolition starts, property value in the entire district will explode. Another added, people have been waiting years to clean up that neighborhood. Clean up that neighborhood. Ethan glanced toward the glowing project map on the screen. For apartment buildings highlighted in red, soon to be demolished. He had approved hundreds of developments over the years without hesitation. Old buildings disappeared. Wealth replaced them. That was how cities evolved. At least that was what he had always told himself. Victor handed Ethan the primary contract folder. All we need tonight is your signature so we can announce Monday morning. Ethan opened the folder slowly. Rows of numbers filled the pages. Tax incentives, acquisition costs, relocation payouts. Then his eyes stopped at one section near the bottom. Current tenant displacement estimates. Over 300 families. Ethan frowned. How many low-income units are being removed? Victor barely looked up. Almost all of them. And relocation? Temporary vouchers. Victor shrugged casually. Most of those buildings are already falling apart anyway. Ethan continued reading. There is a shelter overflow report attached. Legal required it, Victor replied. Nothing important. But Ethan kept staring at the page. The report warned that local shelters were already near capacity during winter months. Additional displacement could increase homelessness among families with children. Ethan suddenly pictured Lily beneath that soaked pink blanket coughing into her mother's shoulder. You all right? Victor asked. Ethan closed the folder carefully. Who currently owns Building C? Victor smiled. That one is the jackpot. Prime Riverview. Answer the question. Victor's smile faded slightly. Families mostly. What? Ethan turned the page again and saw a list of residential occupancy data. Names, ages, family size. One line near the center made his chest tighten unexpectedly. Mitchell, Sarah. One dependent child. Ethan stared at the name for several silent seconds while noise from the room faded into the background. Then Victor leaned closer and lowered his voice. Do not start feeling guilty now. Emotion destroys leverage. Ethan slowly looked up from the contract. Across the room, investors laughed while champagne glasses clinked softly against polished wood. Outside, rain continued falling over the city. And for the first time in years, Ethan no longer felt certain he belonged inside this room. The meeting ended just after midnight, but Ethan never signed the contract. He told the board he needed 24 more hours to review final numbers. Nobody believed that excuse, especially Victor. The moment the investors left the conference room, Victor closed the glass doors behind them and loosened his tie with visible frustration. What exactly is happening to you? He asked. Ethan gathered the untouched documents slowly into a neat stack. I am reviewing risk exposure. Victor laughed once under his breath. No, you are hesitating. Ethan said nothing. Victor stepped closer. Do not tell me this is about some emotional reaction to the relocation reports. 300 families, Ethan replied quietly. That is not a small number. Neither is $20 million. Victor's voice hardened. You built your empire because you understood one thing better than anyone else. Feelings are expensive. Ethan picked up his coat from the chair. Maybe. Victor shook his head. No, not maybe. Definitely. Ethan left the tower without answering. Rain still covered the streets outside, though the city had grown quieter after midnight. His driver opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce, but Ethan did not get in immediately. Across the avenue, a family hurried beneath a pharmacy awning trying to stay dry. A little boy laughed while his father carried him through puddles. For some reason, the sound hit Ethan harder than it should have. Sir, the driver asked carefully. Ethan finally entered the car. Take me home. The penthouse overlooking Central Park was silent when he arrived. 43 floors above the city, surrounded by marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture imported from Italy, Ethan should have felt successful. Instead, the entire place felt strangely empty tonight. He loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of water before standing beside the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Normally, the skyline calmed him. Tonight, it only reminded him how many people existed beneath those lights without warmth or safety. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Then the memories returned before he could stop them. A freezing February night almost 30 years earlier. Wind shaking an old car parked behind a gas station outside Philadelphia. His mother wrapping a winter coat around his shoulders while pretending she was not cold. I am not hungry, she had lied after giving him the last crackers from a vending machine. Ethan remembered staring through fogged windows at families walking into a brightly lit diner across the street. He remembered the humiliation of hearing his mother ask the gas station clerk if they could stay parked there until morning. Most of all, he remembered blaming himself. Children always blamed themselves. Sarah was right. Ethan opened his eyes sharply and walked toward the kitchen counter where his phone buzzed again. Victor. Ignored. Another message appeared seconds later. Investors are getting nervous. Do not sabotage this deal. Ethan set the phone down face first. But his mind kept replaying Sarah's voice from earlier that evening. Watching your child think you're suffering is somehow their fault. He suddenly wondered where she and Lily were sleeping tonight. Whether they had found space at the shelter. Whether Lily's cough had gotten worse in the cold rain. Ethan hated himself for caring. Caring complicated things. Caring slowed judgment. Caring made powerful people weak. At least that was what he had spent years believing. Yet sometime around 2 in the morning, Ethan found himself sitting alone in the dark penthouse, searching through internal housing reports on his laptop. Building C occupancy records. shelter overflow projections, family relocation requests. Then finally, near the bottom of one document, he found an address connected to Sarah Mitchell from before the eviction. Apartment 4B, Riverside Gardens. The exact building scheduled for demolition first. By 7 the next morning, Ethan had slept less than 90 minutes. The city outside his penthouse windows slowly brightened beneath heavy gray clouds, while financial news channels already discussed rumors surrounding the redevelopment announcement. Analysts predicted record profits. Investors expected aggressive expansion. Victor had sent 4 more messages before sunrise. Ethan ignored every one of them. Instead, he sat alone at the kitchen counter staring at the address from the housing report still open on his laptop screen. Riverside Gardens. Apartment 4B. He did not fully understand why he could not let it go. Maybe because Sarah had not asked him for pity. Maybe because Lily reminded him too much of himself at that age. Or maybe because for the first time in years, Ethan had looked directly at the human cost hidden beneath one of his deals. At 8:30, instead of heading downtown to prepare for final approval meetings, Ethan told his driver to take him to the Lower East Side. The shelter on 8th Street, the driver asked with visible confusion. Ethan nodded once. Morning traffic crawled through Manhattan, while pedestrians rushed beneath umbrellas carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Nobody noticed the black Rolls-Royce stopping quietly across from the church shelter. Ethan remained inside the vehicle at first, watching through tinted windows as volunteers handed out paper cups of coffee near the entrance. People lined up silently in the cold morning air. Some looked exhausted. Others looked invisible. Then Ethan spotted Sarah sitting on the church steps beside Lily. The little girl wore the same pink blanket wrapped around her shoulders while reading from the rain-damaged paperback book Ethan had seen the night before. Sarah sat close beside her, gently brushing tangled blonde hair away from Lily's face while helping her sound out difficult words. Ethan checked his watch. 7 minutes passed. Then 10. Sarah never complained once. Never begged anyone walking by. Never asked strangers for money. When another woman farther down the line began crying quietly while trying to calm a toddler, Sarah stood immediately and handed over her own cup of coffee without hesitation. Ethan frowned slightly. Most people barely survived hardship. This woman somehow remained kind inside it. "Sir?" the driver asked carefully from the front seat. "Should I pull closer?" Ethan shook his head. "No," he continued, watching silently. A volunteer approached Sarah holding paperwork and speaking apologetically. Ethan could not hear the conversation, but he saw Sarah's expression tighten slightly before she nodded in understanding. The volunteer pointed toward the crowded shelter entrance and walked away. Lily looked up immediately. "What did she say?" the little girl asked. Sarah forced a small smile that looked painfully practiced. "They are full tonight, too." Lily lowered her eyes toward the book in her lap. "Oh." Ethan felt his chest tighten again unexpectedly. Sarah quickly touched her daughter's shoulder. "Hey," she said softly, "we are okay. But where are we going to sleep?" Lily asked quietly. Sarah hesitated only a second before smiling again. "Adventure night." Lily tried to smile back, though Ethan could tell the child no longer believed those words. Children always knew more than adults realized. Ethan looked away toward the crowded sidewalk outside the window. Across the street, people hurried to work carrying expensive coats and fresh breakfasts without even glancing toward the shelter. Two completely different worlds existing less than 50 feet apart. Then suddenly Lily pointed toward a bookstore display down the block. Ethan watched her face light up for the first time. "Mom," she whispered excitedly. "That one has the new mystery book." Sarah followed her gaze and smiled gently. "Maybe someday." Lily nodded like she understood. Ethan stared at them for another long moment before quietly opening the car door. For the first time in years, he walked toward a problem instead of away from it. Sarah looked up immediately when Ethan approached the church steps. For a brief second, surprise crossed her face before caution replaced it. People dressed like Ethan rarely walked toward shelters unless cameras followed behind them. Ethan stopped a few feet away, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked standing there in a tailored charcoal coat worth more than most monthly rents in the neighborhood. Lily recognized him first. "Mom," she whispered softly, tugging Sarah's sleeve. "That is the man from the car." Sarah stood slowly while keeping one protective hand near her daughter's shoulder. "Good morning," she said politely. Ethan nodded once. "How is her cough?" Sarah seemed surprised by the question. A little better. Ethan glanced toward Lily. Did you get medicine? Not yet, Sarah answered honestly. Ethan reached into his coat pocket before stopping himself halfway. Money again. That was always his first instinct. Throw money at discomfort until it disappeared. But standing there now, he realized Sarah had never wanted charity. She wanted dignity. There is a pharmacy 2 blocks away, Ethan said carefully, and a diner nearby. Sarah immediately shook her head. You do not owe us anything. I know. Ethan looked toward Lily's book. But children should not read mystery novels on church steps in 38-degree weather. Lily smiled slightly at that, though Sarah remained cautious. Why are you here? She finally asked. Ethan opened his mouth, but no answer sounded reasonable. Because I could not stop thinking about what you said. Because your name was buried inside one of my contracts. Because I suddenly realized I built an empire making families like yours disappear quietly. Instead, he simply said, I wanted to help correctly this time. Sarah studied him silently for several seconds. Then Lily coughed again into the pink blanket. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, exhausted. One breakfast, she said softly. That is all. 20 minutes later, the 3 of them sat inside a small diner that smelled like coffee and maple syrup. Morning customers filled most booths while old rock music played quietly from speakers overhead. Ethan could not remember the last time he had eaten somewhere without private reservations or executives surrounding him. Lily sat across from him, carefully stirring hot chocolate while Sarah scanned the menu prices even after ordering. Ethan noticed immediately. You can order whatever you want, he said. Sarah gave a small, embarrassed smile. Habit. Lily looked toward the waitress nervously. Can I really get pancakes? Ethan nodded. Absolutely. For the first time, the little girl smiled fully. The expression hit Ethan harder than billion-dollar negotiations ever had. While they waited for food, Sarah kept apologizing for accepting breakfast at all. Ethan found himself asking questions he normally would never ask anyone. Where had she worked before? How long had Lily loved books? Did they have family nearby? Sarah answered cautiously at first, but slowly relaxed. She explained that she had worked as a nurse at a rehabilitation center in Brooklyn for nearly 11 years before medical debt from her husband Daniel's cancer treatments destroyed their finances. Insurance stopped covering more than we expected, she said quietly. After he passed away, everything collapsed very fast. Ethan listened without interrupting. No self-pity, no dramatic speech, just facts spoken by someone too tired to complain anymore. Then Lily looked up from her pancakes and innocently asked, What do you do for work? Ethan hesitated. Sarah glanced up too. Real estate, he answered finally. Lily smiled. So you build homes? The question landed like a punch to Ethan's chest. He looked down at the coffee growing cold in his hands while Sarah unknowingly watched the expression change across his face. For several long seconds, Ethan could not answer the little girl at all. The question stayed in Ethan's mind long after breakfast ended. So you build homes? Lily had asked it with complete innocence, unaware that the answer was far more complicated than she could understand. Ethan paid the bill while Sarah quietly thanked the waitress twice before helping Lily into her coat. Outside, cold wind swept through the avenue as traffic rolled endlessly past them. For a moment, the 3 of them stood awkwardly on the sidewalk beneath gray morning skies. Ethan checked the time on his watch. Less than 4 hours remained before the emergency board meeting Victor had scheduled. Investors wanted answers. Delays were beginning to cost money. You should get indoors soon, Ethan said. Sarah nodded. We will figure something out. Ethan hesitated. Before speaking again, what if I can help with a hotel for a few nights? Sarah's expression immediately tightened. Mr. Cole. Ethan realized she had seen his name on the credit card inside the diner. It is Ethan. Sarah gave a tired smile. Ethan, you already bought us breakfast. That is not enough. Sarah looked away briefly toward Lily, who had wandered a few feet down the sidewalk to stare into the bookstore window again. People do not usually help without wanting something back, Sarah said quietly. Ethan felt the truth inside those words more than she probably realized. In his world, everything came with conditions. Favors, influence, transactions. Even kindness often hid strategy underneath it. I do not want anything, he replied. Sarah studied him carefully, as if trying to decide whether men like him even knew how to tell the truth anymore. Then before she could answer, Ethan's phone began vibrating again. Victor. Ethan declined the call immediately. Seconds later, another message appeared. Board moved meeting to noon. Everyone is waiting on you. Ethan slid the phone back into his pocket. You should answer that, Sarah said softly. It sounds important. Ethan almost laughed at the irony. A $20 million deal. National investors. Legal teams. Months of negotiations. Yet somehow none of it felt as important as the little girl standing beside the bookstore window wishing for a mystery novel she could not afford. I used to think money solved everything, Ethan admitted quietly. Sarah folded her arms against the cold wind. And now? Ethan looked toward Lily. Now I think money mostly reveals who people already are. For a second, Sarah's guarded expression softened. Then Lily returned holding up a worn paperback from a discount card outside the store. Mom! Look, she said excitedly. It is only $3. Sarah checked the small amount of cash in her pocket before forcing another smile. Maybe later, sweetheart. Ethan watched the exchange silently. $3. Men inside his office argued over numbers with 6 zeros attached to them every day. Yet this child had learned not to ask for something that cost less than a cup of coffee. In Midtown Manhattan, before Sarah could stop him, Ethan walked over, picked up the book, and handed the cashier a $20 bill through the open doorway. Lily's face lit up instantly. Mom, she whispered excitedly while hugging the book against her chest. Sarah looked embarrassed. You did not have to do that. Ethan shrugged lightly. Every kid deserves one good story. For the first time since meeting him, Sarah smiled without exhaustion behind it. The expression caught Ethan off guard. Then his phone rang again. This time Victor did not wait for a message. Ethan answered reluctantly. What? Victor's voice came sharp and cold through the speaker. Where are you? Ethan glanced back toward Sarah and Lily standing together outside the bookstore. Busy. You have exactly 1 hour before investors walk. Victor lowered his voice. And if you destroy this deal because of some emotional breakdown, the board will never forgive you. Ethan looked at Lily clutching the paperback like treasure. Then he answered quietly, maybe they should not. By the time Ethan returned to Cole Development headquarters, the atmosphere inside the building had completely changed. Assistants moved quickly through marble hallways whispering into phones while investors waited inside executive lounges overlooking the city. News of the delayed approval had already started spreading across financial circles. Ethan stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor and immediately saw Victor standing outside the conference room with his arms crossed tightly. Finally, Victor snapped. Do you have any idea what kind of damage this delay is causing? Ethan removed his coat calmly. No contracts were breached. That is not the point. Victor lowered his voice sharply. Investors smell hesitation. And hesitation kills confidence. Ethan walked past him toward the glass conference doors. Maybe confidence deserves to die sometimes. Victor grabbed Ethan's arm before he could enter. Listen to yourself. 3 days ago, you were ready to sign this deal without blinking. Ethan looked directly at him. 3 days ago, I had not met the people living inside those buildings. Victor let go. Immediately, staring at him in disbelief. You are serious. Ethan entered the conference room without answering. The moment he stepped inside, conversation stopped. Lawyers sat beside stacks of contracts while board members exchanged nervous glances around the massive walnut table. Floor-to-ceiling screens displayed architectural renderings of luxury towers shining above the river like monuments to wealth. Ethan took his seat at the head of the table while rain clouds darkened the skyline outside. One senior investor leaned forward impatiently. Mr. Cole, we need confirmation today. Another added, construction teams are already scheduled. Victor remained standing beside the screen. Everything is prepared for signature. Ethan opened the contract one final time. Pages of projected profit blurred together beneath his eyes. $20 million. Tax incentives. Expansion forecasts. Luxury leasing estimates. Then again he reached the tenant displacement report near the back. 300 families. He suddenly pictured Lily asking him if he built homes. The room waited silently. Victor slid a silver pen across the table toward him. Sign it. Ethan stared at the pen for several long seconds. His entire career had been built on decisions exactly like this one. Cold. Efficient. Profitable. That was how powerful men survived in business. You removed emotion before emotion removed you. But now all Ethan could think about was his mother pretending she was not hungry inside that freezing car years ago. Sarah forcing herself to smile while telling Lily they were having an adventure night because shelters were full. A little girl excited over a $3 paperback book. Ethan slowly closed the contract folder. Victor's expression hardened immediately. What are you doing? Ethan looked around the room at every investor waiting for him to choose profit over people one more time. Then he finally spoke. Terminate the acquisition. Silence crashed across the conference room. Nobody moved. One attorney actually removed his glasses as if he had heard wrong. Victor stared at Ethan in complete disbelief. Excuse me. Ethan's voice remained calm. Cancel the redevelopment project effective immediately. You cannot be serious, Victor said sharply. Do you understand how much money you are throwing away? Ethan met his eyes evenly. Yes. This is emotional insanity. No, Ethan replied quietly. This is the first rational decision I have made in years. Investors immediately began arguing across the table while legal teams whispered frantically to each other. Victor stepped closer, furious now. 300 families were always part of the cost, he hissed. That is how business works. Ethan stood slowly from his chair. Then maybe we built the wrong kind of business. Victor laughed bitterly. And what exactly are you planning to replace $20 million with? Ethan looked out at the storm clouds hanging over Manhattan before answering. Something my mother would not be ashamed of. The headlines exploded before sunset. Billionaire developer cancels major Manhattan acquisition. Investors shocked by sudden reversal. Financial analysts called Ethan Cole reckless. Business networks questioned his leadership. Online critics claimed he had lost his edge. By the next morning, Cole Development stock had dropped almost 8%. Victor Hayes resigned publicly less than 48 hours later. Emotion has no place in corporate leadership, he told reporters outside the building. Ethan watched the interview silently from his office television before turning the screen off. For the first time in years, none of it bothered him. The following weeks became the busiest of his life, but not because of profit meetings or expansion deals. Ethan began redirecting company resources towards something entirely different. Instead of demolishing Riverside Gardens, Cole Development announced a full restoration project. Rent protections were extended for existing tenants. Emergency family housing units were added to 2 vacant properties the company already owned downtown. Investors hated it. Community organizations did not believe it at first. Reporters kept asking the same question over and over. Why? Ethan never gave them the full answer. Some things were too personal to turn into press conferences. Nearly 3 months later, spring sunlight filled the renovated community center inside Riverside Gardens, while volunteers prepared folding chairs for the opening ceremony. Children ran through the halls laughing, while families gathered beneath fresh paint and newly installed lights. Ethan stood near the back of the room adjusting the sleeves of his navy suit when he noticed Sarah across the hall speaking with several residents. She looked different now. Rested, healthier, hopeful. The exhaustion that once lived permanently in her eyes had finally started fading. After the redevelopment cancellation, Ethan had quietly helped connect her with a nursing position at a nearby rehabilitation clinic. She accepted only after making him promise it was earned honestly. Everyone who interviewed her wanted to hire her immediately. Lily spotted Ethan first and ran over holding another mystery novel against her chest. I finished 6 books already, she announced proudly. Ethan smiled. 6? That might be a city record. Mom says I read too late at night. Sarah walked over laughing softly. Because she hides a flashlight under the blankets. Ethan looked around the crowded community center while families talked and children played nearby. It looks good in here. Sarah followed his gaze. You saved this place. Ethan shook his head gently. No, I almost destroyed it. Sarah stayed quiet for a moment before speaking softly. Most people never admit when they were wrong. Ethan glanced toward Lily sitting at one of the tables helping another little girl open a book. I spent a long time believing success meant never looking backward. And now? Sarah asked. Ethan thought carefully before answering. Now I think success is whether people feel safer after you leave the room. Before Sarah could respond, an event coordinator approached nervously. Mr. Cole, we are ready for the dedication speech. Ethan immediately shook his head. Not me. He looked toward Lily instead. 10 minutes later, the room fell silent as Lily stood carefully behind the microphone, clutching folded note cards with both hands. Her voice trembled at first, but slowly grew stronger. My mom says home is the place where people stop feeling scared, she read softly. And I think everybody deserves that. Ethan felt his chest tighten unexpectedly while applause filled the room around him. Months earlier, he had almost signed away hundreds of lives for another luxury tower nobody truly needed. $20 million. Endless praise from investors. More headlines. More power. Instead, he stood inside a crowded community center listening to a little girl talk about safety and home while sunlight poured through the windows behind her. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Cole understood what it actually meant to feel rich.